It would be fair to say that the history of philosophy should have ended with Hume if his views had prevailed. To survive Hume's attack, philosophy would need a powerful, subtle, and original mind to come to its defense. It found such a protector in the German Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804. Kant spent the whole of his life in the old Hanseatic city of Königsberg in the northeastern corner of Prussia, today the USSR, where at least until his 50th year he passed his days complacently in the bourgeois life of a respected professor of the university. This old bachelor, whose personal life was so methodical that his neighbors used to set their clocks by his afternoon walks, had been trained in the rationalistic metaphysics of Christian von Wolff, an undistinguished disciple of Leibniz, and Kant had found no reason to doubt any of its tenets. That is, not until one fine day in his late middle age when a copy of Hume's Enquiry crossed his desk. Kant's reading of it awakened him from his dogmatic slumber, as he later reported. He realized that Hume's powerful argument undermined everything Kant had believed, and that no honest progress in philosophy could be made until Hume's skeptical arguments had been refuted. Kant's response to Hume and his attempt to synthesize what he took to be the best of Hume's philosophy with the best of what was left of rationalism after Hume's full-scale frontal assault on it is found in the Critique of Pure Reason. There, Kant accepted Hume's analytic-synthetic distinction as the key philosophical tool of analysis. Kant agreed with Hume that all analytic propositions are a priori and that all a posteriori propositions are synthetic, but he disagreed with Hume's claim that all synthetic propositions are a posteriori and that all a priori propositions are analytic, hence tautological. That is to say, according to Kant, there is such a thing as a synthetic a priori truth, a meaningful statement about reality whose truth is known independently of observation. Kant believed that only by demonstrating the existence of such truths could Hume be refuted and philosophy, science, and common sense, and perhaps religion be made respectable again. This would be done by showing that the knowledge which Hume denied was in fact grounded in synthetic a priori truth, as were the very arguments which Hume had mustered against such claims of knowledge. Kant began by dividing the mind into three faculties: intuition, i.e. perception, understanding, and reason, and then performing what he called a, quote, transcendental, end of quote, analysis of each faculty. Kant first dealt with the faculty of intuition. Here, the primary question which concerned Kant was not what is perception, nor is perception possible, rather it was how is perception possible. That is, he began with the common sense view that we do perceive the world and asked what conditions must hold for that to be possible. For example, he wanted to know how it was possible that we are able to utter true sentences about the height of the Matterhorn if the empiricists were right to say we never perceive space, only sense data. And he wanted to know how it was possible that we are able to utter true sentences about the amount of time it takes to get to Berlin if the empiricists were correct to say that we never perceive time, only sense data. Kant's solution was to demonstrate that space and time are the synthetic a priori foundations of the faculty of perception. An a posteriori sentence like "the cat is on the mat" presupposes the truth of the sentence. Objects exist in space and time, according to Kant. We sometimes know the first sentence to be true, yet it cannot be true unless the second is also true. The latter is not analytic and it is not a posteriority. There is no sense datum of space or time. Hume was right about that. So it must be a synthetic a priori truth. Kant called this method of analysis a transcendental deduction because it transcends direct observation, or better, gets behind and underneath it to discover its necessary conditions. This analysis led Kant to conclude that space and time were not features of external reality, rather they were features of the structure of the mind. The human mind analyzes the data it receives in terms of space and time. Space and time are the irremovable goggles through which we perceive the world. The irremovable goggles. They are not like pieces on a chessboard, things in the world. Rather, they are like the rules according to which we play chess and in whose absence chess would not exist. Having discovered the synthetic a priori foundations of the faculty of intuition, Kant then turned to the faculty of understanding. This is the faculty which enables us to understand facts about the world, that Mount Whitney is higher than Death Valley, that the cat is on the mat. Once again, Kant began not by asking, can there be knowledge of the world? Instead, he began with the common sense assumption that we do have such knowledge and asked how such knowledge was possible. He found that it was grounded in the synthetic a priori foundations of the faculty of the understanding, which he called the categories of the understanding. These categories included those of unity, plurality, totality, causality, and substantiality. These concepts are not deduced by the mind from reality. On the contrary, the mind brings them to reality. This is why Hume had been unable to find them out there when he looked for them. A sentence such as "every event is caused," which to Hume was neither empirical nor true by definition, is, according to Kant, a synthetic a priori truth. Obviously, this theory is reminiscent of the Platonic Cartesian doctrine of innate ideas, but there's a major difference. Kant did not claim that we are born with a group of ideas, but that the mind is structured in such a way that it analyzes its data in terms of a particular set of synthetic a priori rules, which are like a permanent program in a computer in which produce ideas when fed information by the senses. If you're a human being, then you make sense of the world in terms of such concepts as time, space, substantiality, causality. The mind must order the world in terms of thingness, though there is nothing out there called substance. The mind must understand the world in terms of causal series, even though there is nothing out there which is the cause of any event. Kant's position was meant to represent a compromise between the warring rationalists and empiricists. His famous assertion, quote, "thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind," end of quote, was meant to grant to the rationalists that sense data alone could not provide knowledge, and to grant to the empiricists that there could be no knowledge in the absence of sensorial contribution. Kant's solution seemed to many to be successful. However, it had the consequence of putting him in the disconcerting position of admitting that there does exist some kind of ultimate reality, what he called, quote, "the noumenal world," end of quote, or, quote, "the thing in itself," end of quote, das Ding in sich. But that the human mind is incapable of knowing it. Rather, we humans are limited to knowledge of what Kant called, quote, "the phenomenal world," end of quote. The world as perceived, conceived, imagined, interpreted, analyzed, and theorized about by the human mind. That is, we can only know a world which has passed through the human mind, through the grid work of space and time and the categories of the understanding. Contrary to Hume's conclusion, for Kant, common sense and science are valid, but only insofar as their claims are about the phenomenal world, that nothing positive can be said about ultimate reality other than it exists. This meant that traditional metaphysics of the type attempted by philosophers from Plato through Leibniz was impossible. Kant deduced this conclusion from his transcendental analysis of the faculty of reason. The faculty of reason was supposed by Kant to be the faculty which produced the pure concepts, i.e. concepts uncontaminated by the senses, such as God and soul. Were there any synthetic a priori foundations for this faculty? Which is another way of asking, can we hope to know any higher truths about ultimate reality? Kant's notorious answer, which was so scandalous to the metaphysicians and theologians, was no. Traditional metaphysics was impossible because it was always the result of illegitimately applying notions of space, time, and causality to the noumenal world, when in fact these concepts can only be applied to the observable world. This is why all proofs of God's existence must fail, along with all attempts to describe ultimate reality in terms of that mysterious category, quote, "substance," end of quote. We humans must therefore despair of ever knowing of God, justice, immortality, or freedom, since all of these ideas overreach the human capacity for knowledge. If Kant had concluded the critique of pure reason at this point, he would have satisfied the Humean critics of metaphysics and theology while at the same time pleasing the defenders of common sense and science. But he would not have satisfied those impulses in the human heart toward higher sentiments. To these stirrings, Kant addressed the rest of his critique. There he claimed the following: there is no logical necessity to conceive of the world in terms of God, immortality, justice, and freedom, in the way that there is a logical necessity of conceiving the world in terms of time, space, and causality. Nevertheless, without such inspirational concepts, many humans would lose their enthusiasm for life. If one could not believe, for example, that the human soul is free and that ultimately justice will triumph, then one might well lose the motivation required for the engagement in the day-to-day world. Therefore, according to Kant, one has the right to believe, but not to claim to know, that God, soul, immortality, justice, and freedom exist, not as metaphysical necessities, but as practical, i.e. moral necessities. We have the right to treat these topics as if they were synthetic a priori truths, if doing so will make us better, more successful human beings. Kant's attempt to distinguish knowledge from belief, yet ground belief in moral necessity, was acceptable to many who were tired of the extravagant claims made by metaphysicians and theologians, but who were also looking for a legitimate role for the belief in the modern world. Kant's critics, however, accused him of merely kicking God out the front door in order to let him in through the back door. After the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant wrote a number of other important philosophical works, including the Critique of Practical Reason and the Foundations of the Metaphysics of Morals, both of which addressed specifically the problem of ethics. In its emphasis on intention and duty, Kant's theory demonstrated Christianity's influence on him, and in its attempts to ground duty in reason, Kant's theory showed him to be a thinker of the Enlightenment. By positing freedom as if it were grounded in a synthetical a priori truth, for without freedom there can be no moral acts, one can derive an ethical code from its foundations in reason. Being a rule-guided activity, reasoning itself is based on a respect for rules and laws. From such respect, Kant deduced a moral command, which he called the categorical imperative. Quote, "So act that the maxim of your action could be willed as a universal law," end of quote. All moral acts can be derived from principles which may be universalized without contradiction. Kant thought that as creatures of reason, we are duty-bound to obey such principles. Here, we will oversimplify this idea a bit to see what Kant was talking about.